book will not be suitable. Now, even if you go through that tendering process through public bidding, etc., and without negotiations, most likely at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a result whereby somebody wins the tender, but as the project progresses, the risks, as soon as they begin to surface, the winning party might not be able to address those risks or to manage those risks, and that becomes a sure indication for failure on the project. So that basically is an overview of the FIDI contracts and an overview of the silver book, particularly in relation to how it relates to the characteristics of EPC projects. I understand that we're going to have some sort of break of some sort, but afterwards I put together a scenario, a workshop scenario, which we can all sort of discuss together and look at some sort of typical or usual issues that crop up on projects and which we can address using the silver book.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faniran. Please, once again, a round of applause for Dr. Faniran for doing a wonderful job to the topic. But in line with our program, we'll be taking questions and the workshop section now. It is after the question and answer section and the workshop that will go for our tea break. If you check your program, that is how it is on the program. Thank you very much. The question and answer and the workshop can start.
Sorry, I seem to have usurped the program which the organizers have put in place. So we're going to be having question and answers now. So just take a question.
I will first read the three questions we have here, then we'll now give participant mic to ask questions directly. But we have three questions that have been submitted. We'll treat those three first, then we'll select participants to... Oh. The first question here. The JCT contract stipulates that payment and valuation certificates should be monthly, unless pre-agree otherwise. Is there a rule in the FIDIC conditions that stipulates a period for payment, application, or is it left at the discretion of the contractor under FIDIC?
Under FIDIC clause 14, the default position is monthly payment certificates. For the red and yellow books, the default position is monthly. For the silver book, every silver book contract comes with a schedule of payments, and they are tied actually to milestones, not to a period of time. So on completion of a certain milestone, it could be supply of certain equipment to site, it could be completion of a part of the project, it could be production of whatever, of water, whatever it is. The payments are tied to those milestones. So yeah, so under the FIDIC, FIDIC red and yellow books, the default is monthly payment certificates, except agreed otherwise. But under the FIDIC silver book, there's a specific payment schedule that's tied to milestones that relate to completion of the works.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question is there any clear yardstick for determining whether to use the FIDIC conditions or the JCT conditions? If yes, what are the yardsticks?
Well, that's an interesting one. I'm not very familiar with JCT, to be honest. But however, I know that the FIDIC was designed, as I said earlier on, for international contracts where you have multiple entities from different sort of legal jurisdictions coming together. And that was the intention of the contract. So I would say that FIDIC contracts are more suited to those sort of projects. So large infrastructure projects, for example, where they're being funded by the World Bank or they're being funded by lending agencies, and you have stakeholders from different parts of the world. I think JCT is sort of more local, if I may put it that way. It's intended more for a local industry, local application, and it's also intended for smaller projects. I might be wrong. I mean, Matthew might be able to comment on that. The question was about JCT and FIDIC, and about
let me read the question again. The question is it. The question, is there any yardstick for determining whether to use the FIDIC conditions or the JCT condition?
Yeah, what he said was sort of mirroring what I said. He said JCT is FIDIC for international projects, JCT for local projects.
Yeah, although I think JCT would like to encroach upon that market. It's just familiarity, isn't it? Sort of like JCT is very familiar in the UK and certain other countries, whereas FIDIC's, it's persuading people to come out of their comfort zone and use other contracts, isn't it? But FIDIC is generally recognised as international work, but never used in England, so, or not to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think you have lots of international projects per se in England. I mean, I think a lot of your projects are done sort of with local expertise, so that might account for why.
Yeah, are you getting much NEC contracts now as well? They're trying to really hit hard against FIDIC, aren't they? So, and they've just bought a contract to try and compete with the Silver Book, haven't they? So, although it's not quite as onerous, I believe, in the NEC full suite. But, anyway, I'll digress.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Davis. The next question here is it safe to say that projects administered using FIDIC conditions are of higher net worth than the JCT-based contract? Or is cost not an ideal measure for comparison?
I don't think cost is a measure of comparison per se, but however, if you look at the fact that FIDIC is mainly used on international projects, generally they tend to be more expensive anyway. So on that basis, I would say that FIDIC is used more for sort of larger projects, but I don't think the cost is a differentiating factor in terms of when you decide which one to use.
you have any contributions?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, in the UK market, we have JCT or NEC for any value sort of contracts, but it's like you say, typically you're going to get higher net worth projects abroad, aren't you?
All right, thank you very much. Now, is there any provision for loss of right claim by the contractor in the FIDIC Red Book? Is there any provision for loss of right claim by the contractor in the FIDIC Red Book?
Loss of rights claim. What's loss of
Okay,
rights?
loss of profit claim, sorry. Loss of profit claim. Loss of profit claim by the contractor.
There is, but I don't think it's a direct thing. The one that I'm familiar with is when it comes to extension of time, prolongation. So during the period of prolongation, the direct expenses of the contractor and the loss of profits arising as a result of that extended period of time. But having said that, if there's any breach of contracts on the part of the employer, which can be related to loss of profits, then I believe that the contractor is entitled to claim that.
That's all right. Thank you. Questions from participants? Okay, please give mic to the man.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mrs. Fumi Roberts, and I am not a QS or a member of the build industry. I'm a lawyer, and I'm sure you wonder why a lawyer is here in this room. The reason is very simple. This is about construction contracts, and my law firm does a lot of work in that field. So when we saw the topic, we felt we have to be here. And I thank you all for having us, particularly Mr. Anago, who signposted us to this two-day workshop. I'm supposed to ask a question, but let me first of all congratulate you about what I saw yesterday. It was the first time I would go into a room and it started promptly, and the first time that I'll hear a keynote address short and very straight to the point. Congratulations. Apart from the fact that my law firm does a lot of work in this space, I'm an ADR expert in the sense that I do arbitration, mediation, and adjudication. And I've done a bit in this space. The key issue I have encountered is with record keeping. The adjudication that I did with a multinational company and one of the biggest construction firms in Nigeria was paper dominated. But I found that one of the parties had so much, the compilation of their records, the documents brought before me was so awesome. It was one of the best that I've ever had to deal with, even in an arbitration. That at the end of the day, I had to commend them for coming up with the kind of documents that assisted me in reaching my decision. On the other hand, the employer was very tardy in keeping records, and I was quite concerned about that. Then the question that came to mind when you were talking is that, is there any template of how these records should be kept in the industry? Or are parties expected to design or work in an ad hoc manner in terms of keeping records? In the event that a dispute arises, it is those records that's going to help the dispute resolution expert to help them to arrive at a resolution. But if the records are not there, there's very little you can do unless the law has allowed you to ensure that justice is done, which is not what the law does all the time. So my question is there a template of all these record-keeping strategies that is peculiar to the construction industry, or parties have to build each on an ad hoc basis? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. I think your question touches on actually a number of issues. Maybe I'll start from the last. Yes, the answer is yes, there is and there are templates for record keeping. But those templates are not attached to contracts. So for example, FIDIC doesn't have the template that they provide. And I doubt if the JCT has a template for record keeping. But having said that, it is a good practice, very, very good practice for parties to a contract on a project to keep records properly. In order to win an arbitration case or whatever it is, you obviously have to demonstrate what we call cause and effect. And you have to demonstrate very clearly. So if you have a claim, if it's a time issue, which is the example that I always use, you have to be able to demonstrate clearly that a particular event caused a particular delay, and that the other party was liable, the employer was liable for that particular delay. Now, good contract administrators would keep records properly. In fact, it's part of good contract administration, the record keeping. Having said that, there's lots of both employers and contractors that obviously don't do that. I mean, I've been involved in several where they call us to come and put in a claim for them, or there's an arbitration and we get there and we say where the record, and they say, well, we don't have, that's why we called you to come and help us, and then you start asking yourself, so what exactly am I supposed to do, but obviously, with the help of legal minds, probably like yourself, and with the help of very good contract administrators, there are ways of sometimes going around to come up with those records. I don't mean fabricating, but coming up with things that are able to then sort of substantiate what is being claimed or what's being disputed. So I think the short answer to your question is that the contract forms themselves do not have templates for record keeping, but that is meant to be a part of good contract administration on both the employer side and on the contractor side. I hope that sort of answered you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Basit Wakale, and my question is on the FIDIC Silver Book. You said the Silver Book is not suitable for a project where the employer wants to have control to some aspects of the design. So my question is, can you adopt two separate books on a particular project where you want to shift the risk to the contractor and you still want to maintain some control in some aspect of the project? So can you adopt two separate FIDIC books on a particular project?
Well, first of all, on any project there can only be one, there should only be one contract. However, if you are able to split the scope of work into two and then apply separate contracts for both of them, then probably you could do that. So you can't have sort of two contracts for the one scope of work, so to speak. But if you are able to split the scope of work into two, yes, you can do that. And again, the FIDIC, as I said earlier, FIDIC are model forms of contracts, which means that typically you can sit down and have a look at what part of it you want to amend. I mean, it's not recommended by FIDIC themselves, but you can come into agreements with the other party, the employer or the contractor, to amend certain things to suit your particular requirements on the project.
All right, thank you. Any other question? Okay, while we're waiting for the next question, you see, on the issue of JCT and FIDIC, you see, they are developed by different bodies. JCT, according to Peter Burns, we listened to Mr. Peter Burns yesterday. Development of JCT was championed by the Royal Institute of British Architects, RIBA, and it deals mainly with building works. And FIDIC, okay, in JCT you see the consultant that are normally engaged to champion the project is architect or contract administrator. So for JCT, it's architect. For FIDIC, you see it's engineers, engineers, engineers. Architects are not mentioned in the FIDIC. So, but in JCT is architect, architect, and contract administrator. And JCT also mentioned quantity surveyors and assigned roles to quantity surveyor, but that is contrary in the FIDIC. Those are the, the difference, some difference between the JCT and FIDIC. Okay, the barrister.
I just want to ask whether the fact that they use the word architect means that it has to be an architect who will perform that role. Or, because in law, for example, if I were to interpret, I would not look at the appellations used. I'd look at the role that you have played. If you've played the role assigned to that particular expert in the book, whether you call him an administrator or an engineer or an architect, would not go towards, and then you come to the witness stand and say, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm not an architect. As long as you performed that role, that's what I'm going to take into consideration. So I don't know whether it must necessarily be an architect or it could be anybody performing that role. Thank you.
As we touched about yesterday, the reason the JCT has architect stroke contract administrator is because in the traditional forms of contract, in order to call yourself an architect, as a matter of law, you had to be a member of the RIBA and a registered architect. As the industry has diversified and evolved, it's recognised that there are other professionals who are equally taking on board the role of a contract administrator. We've got quantity surveyors and other professionals who are now playing that active role. So in order to facilitate somebody other than an architect being a contract administrator, it specifically amended the role to say you can be an architect, or if you're not an architect, you could be a contract administrator. So you may have government or local authorities that want to use their own person, but they're not a registered architect. So
to add a bit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthew Davis. Now, another question for you, sir.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to add a bit to what Mr. Davis said just now regarding what she was saying about the issue of architects and engineers, etc. In the case of the FIDIC, the part of the traditional roles of the engineer, well, first of all, in FIDIC, they don't define an engineer as somebody who is an engineer. You see what I mean? They talk about the engineer. But part of the roles of the engineer traditionally includes supervising the design, issuing design drawings, and those sort of things. Now, obviously, if that is the role of that particular entity, that entity needs to have the expertise in order to perform that role. So I suppose maybe from a strictly legal viewpoint, the engineer is not defined in FIDIC as somebody who has to be an engineer. There is a requirement in FIDIC that the contractor has to accept the person that has been proposed as the engineer on the basis that the person is competent to perform those functions. And it's unlikely that they will accept somebody who is not able to perform those functions, which include design, supervision, and stuff like that. So I suppose that's, and because FIDIC focuses a lot on infrastructure projects, etc. I suppose that's why they use the term engineer rather than the term architect there.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Faniran. Another question here is, under the FIDIC form of contract, resolution seems to be arbitration based. Is there any avenue for legal resolution, that is, going to court, to the law court? Yeah. Can this be inserted from day one?
Yes, as I said earlier on, when we talk about FIDIC contract or JCT contract or whatever it is, in any project and on any contract, it could be anything really, to be honest. You have to look at that particular project and that particular contract and see what's specified there. Now, specifically, FIDIC encourages arbitration FIDIC encourages alternate dispute resolution. They encourage that a lot because of certain reasons of it being faster and cheaper and stuff, but that's a topic for another forum. And that's why FIDIC incorporates it into the contract. However, it's not uncommon for the parties to change that to law. In Saudi Arabia, for example, I know that they tend to prefer going to court because you're not likely to win, but anyway, that's it. So they tend to